to move on to Harry from Foursquare, and he is the head of server engineering. And we all know Foursquare. Lets you check in. I checked in tonight. I hope a lot of you guys did too. But not everybody knows exactly kind of what Foursquare does behind the scenes and how it works. So this is Harry.
Okay, so first I'll say that I think Daniel kind of grabbed these slides for me since I didn't get them to him in time. So I'm going to speak a little bit about how Foursquare is architected and why we chose to use MongoDB and the advantages that has brought to us. And hopefully that will at least vaguely relate to these slides. So if we actually skip past the data model slide. So at Foursquare, just to give you some numbers, we do probably about 1,000 API calls or web request calls per second at peak. And to power all that, it really becomes a data storage and retrieval problem. We have these applications that do all these great things, but really in essence, they have to store and retrieve data fast enough for it to all work. So we have 8 different clusters for MongoDB to store different kinds of data. Most of them are sharded. 2 of them are not for various reasons. And this is a little out of date. It says that some are master-slave and some other ones are replica sets. That's actually not true now. We're now actually using replica sets everywhere. It's closer to 50 machines today. It keeps going up very rapidly, which I'm sure the guys at Amazon, who we pay a big bill to every month, really appreciate. There's closer to 2.7 billion records at this point. And then probably closer to about 20,000 queries per second across all these databases. So it's pretty big. It's not crazy town big, but it's moderately big. So basically, when Foursquare was a lot smaller and before I was even working on it, it was built on a SQL backend. It was just Postgres. It was very straightforward. It's exactly like 10,000 other applications on the web. But as we were growing, it was clear that we were going to hit a bottleneck pretty fast. We really wanted to stay on Amazon Web Services, and they only have machines of a limited size, and the disk I/O really sucks. So we were definitely not going to be able to scale up. It was clear that we were going to need to scale out. And so we had a couple of different options. The obvious option would have been to stay with Postgres and go with kind of a Facebook or Twitter style solution. But really that would have involved a lot of work. We would have had to build our own sharding layer. We would have had to build our own replication layer. We would have had to build our own kind of balancing layer. And quite frankly, we were spending all our time building the product and didn't want to do all that. Not because we were lazy, but just because we didn't have time. We didn't want to stop building the product and start working on the infrastructure all the time. So basically what we did is we outsourced that to Dwight and his company, and we have a bunch of engineers basically doing work over there for us for free, which is fantastic. Thank you, Dwight. So why did we pick MongoDB? Like I said, the biggest reason by far is the auto sharding. Basically, it allows us very easily to scale out. We can add nodes to our cluster, and when auto balancing is on, it will balance data on over to these new empty nodes and keep everything more or less balanced to enable us to keep the performance where we need it to be for the application to function. It basically scales horizontally, maybe not infinitely, but certainly up to hundreds of nodes, which is far away from where we are today. So that's fantastic. But what are some of the other reasons that we really like MongoDB? The second biggest reason is that it's a document store instead of just a row store like a SQL database. SQL databases, like she said, are really old. They date back to the 50s and 60s. Not the 60s, and they're not quite that old. Certainly older than I am. Okay, well, close enough. There's really an entirely different kind of programming that goes on today. Pretty much everybody in the world is doing object-oriented programming of one kind or another. And this really, at least for us at Foursquare, maps a lot better to using an object store database like MongoDB. Rather than having, we actually reduced the number of tables that we had in our database by about a factor of 2 when we did our migration.
Wow.
Because rather than having lots of different tables and join tables, joining them all together, you just have these objects that are a little bit more complicated with nested data fields that allows you to keep things a lot more compact and mapped a lot more directly to the kind of programming you're doing. So it just makes it a lot easier for engineers at Foursquare to reason about what they're doing. So why did we pick MongoDB over some of the other choices we had? There's obviously a lot of different ways that we could go. We spent a lot of time thinking about Cassandra, obviously MongoDB. We looked at Riak a little bit. And really, we like MongoDB because it's closer to a traditional database than a lot of these other technologies. We didn't want to have to make too big of a change that early in the company. It's one of these situations where if we did it wrong, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And by picking MongoDB, we got to pick something that's fairly similar to a traditional SQL database in terms of how you reason about things, which made the transition a lot more straightforward. It's also a lot more full-featured than a lot of other NoSQL databases. You know, it's very easy to have secondary and tertiary indices, and they keep adding a lot of features on top of their database that are basically designed for very practical purposes. You know, MongoDB is basically a web app database. They go out into the world and they talk to web developers and say, hey, what are the problems that you're having? And they work very hard to make things as simple for you as they possibly can. And we find that very appealing. So that was just a big spiel of information. Hopefully some of you guys find it useful.